Game over, lights out.
Yeah, that's fine.
You've just been completely obliterated publicly.
Shut up while I'm talking, right?
You've been folded like a chair caught with your pants down.
Will you fucking shut him up? I wanna respond.
I'm not speaking meaningfully about anything, okay? Because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing.
But I don't see how this is relevant to the point that Altoid was making earlier. What Altoid, if I'm interpreting what Altoid was saying, is that there's going to be certain things from your point of view that categorically speaking ought not to occur, right? And if they're categorically speaking actions that ought not to occur, then under any context, those actions are morally impermissible, right? And if they're morally impermissible, it's just going to be a contradiction to say that God has a morally sufficient reason to allow those things to occur.
Wait, Darth, do you think that ought be
No, I just want
allowed?
JRobin to respond.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not the case. So there are different contexts in which things ought and ought not happen. Okay, so if you're going to tell me that things ought
No,
to
but I'm
happen,
talking about the
then you'd be
categorical
conflating.
odds. I'm talking about the categorical odds. I'm talking about things that, all things considered, ought not to occur.
Yeah, so there are things that ought to occur in one sense and things that ought not happen in another sense.
Yeah, but this is irrelevant to my point. Now you're just talking about an instrumental ought, things that are conditionalized to agents' desires. What I'm asking you is, how do you not see the contradiction in things being evil in a way that's all things considered evil, which is just another way of saying that those things, all things considered, ought not to be done and therefore are morally impermissible, and in all good God permitting those things to occur?
They ought not happen, right? So if we're talking about things like murder,
Yeah.
they ought not happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Categorically
They ought not happen
speaking.
with respect to they ought not happen with respect to God's prescriptive will. Okay? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
When
but
we say that they ought
that's
to happen,
that's
when we say
irrelevant
that
to
they
my
ought to happen,
that's
I'm
irrelevant
speaking.
that's
I'm
irrelevant
speaking.
to my point, J.
When you say that they ought to happen, what you're talking about with respect to God's decretive will is that they are a part of God's overall plan. Okay, and that they bring us to the fulfillment of God's plan
Yeah, but the
of history.
fulfillment of God's plan is just going to be conditionalized to God's desires, which is just an instrumental ought. So again, you're just bringing something irrelevant to my point. My point is that there's going to be certain things from your point of view, since you're a moral realist, that ought not to occur under any circumstance, right? Because they're categorically morally impermissible. And if they're categorically morally impermissible, then obviously an all good God can't morally permit those things to occur, right? Because then if you're going to say that God permits the morally impermissible, you're saying that the action in question, it's both the case that the action in question ought to occur, and it's not the case that the action in question ought to occur, which is a contradiction.
Darth, can I ask you a
We're not
clarifying
referring to
question?
I'm not referring to the fact. So yeah, I'm not saying that it's impermissible in all circumstances because God permits them.
No, but you do,
That's not my
but
position.
but that again irrelevant. But you do believe that there are certain actions which, all things considered, shouldn't occur, correct?
Not with respect to God's decretive will. No, not. I don't believe that there's anything that um like all things whatever happens in the world ought to happen right within God's ultimate plan.
Okay,
Right.
tell me again, what are the actions in which you think, from God's perspective, shouldn't occur at all, right?
Things that are not
Categorically,
happening.
things that are not happening, right? But
Yeah.
things that are not happening don't have any moral connotation there, right? You're just telling me
We're not
that
talking
this
about
state
moral
of affairs
connotations.
isn't,
But that's just
right?
to say that like
That's
evil
irrelevant.
doesn't occur.
We're not talking about moral connotations when we're talking about the ultimate decretive will of God.
The ultimate decree, yeah, but the ultimate decretive will of God, you understand, is conditionalized to what his plan is, as you just admitted, which is just the instrumental ought, right? What I'm asking is, what is the categorical ought in which indicates that there's certain things that shouldn't occur under any context? Not that they don't occur, that they shouldn't occur under any context. And you just saying that those things don't happen is a descriptive statement, not a normative one, right?
Yeah, we're not talking about things that ought not to happen in any circumstance,
Yeah,
because there are things that God allows in
that's
certain circumstances and things that
because
God
my
allows in other
argument is
circumstances.
related to these pro tanto evils, right? Which is just to say these types of evils that shouldn't occur under any context, right? And if they shouldn't occur under any context, then under no context are those things morally permissible by definition.
When we're talking about moral evil, we're not talking about things that should not happen under any context.
Yeah,
That's not what we're talking
those
about.
types of evils, I take it, that have a normative connotation there. So you're just saying that those things don't occur. That's just a descriptive state of affairs. That's not a
You
normative.
didn't understand what I said. You didn't understand what I said.
Well,
When we're
then you're
talking about
not
moral
addressing my
evils,
critique.
when we're
You're
talking
not
about
addressing
moral
my critique.
evils, when we're talking about
Yeah, I don't give
moral
a shit
evils,
about what you're
Let's
talking
hear
when we're
what
about.
talking
JRobin's
about
gonna
Are
moral
say.
you going to
evils,
Darth.
address
when
my
we're talking
argument?
about moral evils,
Let's hear what he's.
when we're talking about moral evils, we're not talking about things that happen. Sorry, when we're talking about moral, yeah, we're not talking about things that ought not happen under any circumstance, under any context. That's not what we're talking about when we say moral evils. Moral evils are specific to a specific context, and that would be the prescriptive will of God, right?
Well,
We're not
no,
talking
that's
about things that ought
actually
not happen
incorrect,
in any
right?
context.
Because moral evils can actually refer to pro tanto things that are evil, right? Do you think that
That's not what we're talking about.
do you think that the term moral evil is just context specific, right?
In the
Always.
Christian worldview, is specific to God's prescriptive will. Yeah,
Also, then I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to see then how you're a moral realist and you believe in categorical oughts. Then, if they're just instrumentalized to God's desire.
yeah. We're not talking about when I talk about moral evils. We're not talking about things that ought not happen under any context or any circumstance.
Yeah, and I'm saying,
So, what's the
but look,
contradiction?
the contradiction is that there's certain things, right, that are pro tanto evil that shouldn't occur, in which case, if they shouldn't occur, they're going to be morally impermissible. But you're saying that God morally permits those things to occur. That's a contradiction.
Yeah, we're not talking. So again, um, there is nothing that is completely impermissible, right? That we're talking about God allowing them, right? So, for example, um, it is permitted that people break God's moral decrees. It's permitted. God allows it. It's obviously true. There's no Christian who doesn't hold that to be true.
But if
So
it's permissible, then it's just not the case
the
that it ought
contradiction,
not to occur.
the contradiction. Let me finish. The contradiction wouldn't stand against the position that I
But
or
see, if God morally
a great many,
permits
if not
those
most, other
things,
Christians have
sorry, but you see, if
hold to.
God morally permits those things, how are you going to say in the same context that those things shouldn't occur, right? That just
God
denotes
permits them
another
with
context.
respect. No, they ought not occur with respect to God's moral law, and that's what we're held morally accountable for.
Yeah, but but the moral law informs you that those actions are morally impermissible. If they're morally impermissible, then it's the case that they shouldn't be done. You would agree with that, correct?
Yeah, with respect to God's permissive will. Yeah.
Okay, but when you say God's permissive will, are you saying that God morally permits those things to
Sorry,
occur,
not
or is
permissive, prescriptive. I meant prescriptive.
okay?
Yeah.
So now you're fumbling around the wills, right? So
No, I just misspoke. I
what
didn't
is his
because we're
prescript?
talking
Does
about
his
permissive.
prescriptive
Yeah,
does his prescriptive will inform that those things ought not to?
with respect to his prescriptive will. Yeah.
With respect to yeah, but look, if you're saying that from his prescriptive will those things ought not to be done, right? What ought not to be done is just going to be morally impermissible, and what's morally impermissible should
You're just begging
not
the
be
question against my
morally
position.
permitted. Yeah, it
You
shouldn't
realize
be
that's what you're
morally
doing, right? You're just
permitted.
begging the question against my
That's
position
not
because
begging the
I don't. I'm
question.
not.
That's just
No, because my
denoting what you're
position. My
trying to
position is
mean.
that is my
J.
position is
Robin,
not
that's
that things
just
ought
what the
not happen
terms mean.
and under any circumstance, right? That's not my position, and that's not the position of Christians because
That doesn't matter. It
obviously,
doesn't matter. Look, it
obviously,
doesn't even matter. It doesn't even
obviously.
matter. It doesn't
Yes,
even
I'm speaking.
matter. If
I'm
it
speaking.
doesn't
Let's
even
give
matter.
JRobin a chance
I'm
to
It,
speaking.
explain.
Yeah. So
wait,
when we're talking about things, there's so listen. When we're talking about God's moral decrees, it's not the case, and it's not the position that they ought not happen under any circumstance because God lets them happen. God allows it to happen. Violations of them, I'll say. God allows violations of them to happen. So if by impermissible, you're saying that there is no circumstance in which they are permitted or they will be permitted. or they should be permitted within a certain context, then this is not true. It's not true that they shouldn't be permitted under any context,
They shouldn't be. Look, but
or it shouldn't be.
you're still saying from your point of view that those things, analytically speaking, shouldn't occur. So it doesn't really matter, right? In that context, if it shouldn't occur, then the agent in question shouldn't morally permit it to occur, right? So it doesn't even matter what the context is. And I'm saying
Oh,
in
yes, it
that
does.
very context, right, there's not going to be a sufficient pro toto reason for God to allow it to occur in the first place. Do you know the
Oh, yes, there
difference
is.
between a pro tanto and a pro toto?
I don't know the difference between those two things.
Well,
But
there's
the
going
point
to
is that
be.
God says God has a reason to allow them to the fulfillment of His plan.
Okay, but but then if you're just saying if it's for the fulfillment of his plan, then it's not going to be the case that the things that he's morally permitting in that context shouldn't occur, right? Because they're conducive towards his ends.
Well, they should occur with so they should occur with respect to the like God's decretive will, but they shouldn't occur with respect to the permissive will, or not permissive, the prescriptive will.
Okay, but in his decretive will question, it's not the case that those things in question shouldn't occur, right? So he has all the reason to permit it to happen. And what you mean by permit here is that he morally permits them to occur, right? So what I'm not understanding is why you would call those things evil from the decretive will perspective.
God is moral in permitting them to occur. Okay, that doesn't make the actions themselves morally
Well, now you're just
right.
repeating. Now you're just repeating the claim, right? The claim, the
No, it's just my
argument that I'm
position.
making is that if
You
he
have to present
has
your
a
argument.
pro toto, if he has a pro toto reason to morally permit those things to occur, then under that context, those things wouldn't be evil.
I don't see how that follows. How does it follow that they are
Because it's
that they
conducive.
therefore
Anything,
let me
anything that
finish. Let me finish the question. How does it follow that if something is bringing us closer to one sense of God's will, that therefore they ought to happen with respect to another
again,
sense
you're
of
just
God's will?
repeating a question. So here was where I answer. So premise one, anything that's conducive towards God's desires um, is something that from God's decretive will ought to occur. Premise two, I don't know, stabbing a baby to death is conducive towards God's ends, right? Conclusion, therefore, stabbing a baby is something from God's decretive will ought to occur. Now, do you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree. It is conducive to God's decretive will. Yeah.
Okay, so then you admit that if God has a pro toto reason to allow those things to occur, right? Then if what we mean by allow here is that he morally permits those things to occur, then under this context, those things aren't evil.
Yeah, and if by evil you're talking about things that God allows to happen and things that God does not allow to happen, or sorry, if by evil you're saying things that God does not allow to happen, um, then yeah, nothing. There's nothing that happens that God does not allow to happen.
Right. So
That's not how we
you
use the word
agree
evil.
that if God morally permits the person to stab the baby to death, then under that context, right, and we're even applying your position here, those things ought
Yeah,
to occur, and therefore they
yeah, but
aren't
that's
evil.
not like I. That's I've. You know, this is like the third or fourth time, or third or fourth person who's like just said what the Christian position is, right? But that's not how we use the word evil in most circumstances. So you haven't actually done anything by way of
No,
presenting a
but
contradiction.
look, but you already noted that there's a distinction between those things being evil in the instrumental sense, right? And those
Yeah,
things being evil in the categorical sense. I'm saying
yeah.
that in this
So what
case,
is the what's the
I'm
contradiction
sorry,
again?
I'm not done speaking. I'm saying that in this case, instrumentally speaking, since they're conducive to God's desires, God's ends, it's not the case that that action ought not to occur. And if it's
Yeah,
the
that's not
case that that
controversial.
action not ought to occur, then it's not evil.
Yeah, in that so with respect to God's decretive will, there is nothing that is evil. If by evil you're saying that they are out of accord to God's decretive will. There's nothing that's evil in that circumstance. But that's
Right,
not
and that's
controversial,
your
it's not
position. Your
complicated.
position. Your
No, no,
position.
it's not.
You
That's not
don't.
my position. That's not my position.
You said earlier that you take it that there's not going to be anything, right, which isn't going to be, let's say, all things considered evil, right, categorically speaking, because the
Yeah, but
Christian.
there's no evil with respect to God's ultimate decretive will.
Yeah, you said earlier that the Christian position is that those certain things are not going to be all things considered evil, right? Because these things in question are conditionalized to God's desires and God's ends, right? And I'm saying if you're applying that view and anything that occurs is what's conducive to God's desires, and anything that occurs that's conducive to God's desires is moral, right? Then anything that's conducive
No,
to
that's not.
God's
No, that's not
desires.
what I said. No, no. So now you just like completely misrepresented what I said, right? So now you've now took the route of just you know taking different steps to the goal that we're not actually contributing to. So I didn't say that everything that happens in the world is in accordance with God's prescriptive will. That's not what I said. I said that they're in accordance with God's decretive will, and so far as they are in accordance with God's decretive will, they're
But
good if that's what you take it to mean. Okay.
you just admitted that he morally permits them under his decretive will. And I'm saying that if he
Yeah,
morally
God is
permits them.
moral. God is moral in the act of permitting them and in enacting his sovereignty and sustaining the
Yeah,
world in the midst of that
I
evil. God is
understand, but
moral in that
that's not
action.
even relevant, right? I'm saying that
So that's what I meant when I said God is
if
morally
you
permitting them.
think
So it is
if you
relevant.
think that he morally permits those things to occur, then it's not the case that the things in question that he's morally permitting ought not to occur. So they're not evil under that context.
They ought not.
Darth,
No, well, it's not true that they ought not. It's not true that they ought not occur with respect to one context, not the other context.
Yeah, but
Okay.
why are you
By
bringing in the other
when I
context?
told you
That's the
when I
only
told you
context that matters.
when I told you that God is morally permitting an action, I said that God is, well, at least um, what I was telling you was that God is moral in his action of enacting or exercising his sovereignty and omnipotence. That's what I meant when I say that God is morally permitting them. I say that he's acting in a morally
Yeah, but I
um
don't care about
like
God's
just fashion.
actions. I'm saying that
Well,
in
that's what
this
you told me. You said
context,
that God is
I'm
morally
saying that in
permitting
this
them. So that's what I was
context, no,
saying.
I'm saying if he, no, look, I'm saying that if he morally permits X, right, then you're basically admitting under that context from his decretive will that X ought to occur, right, given that's morally permissible by God.
In his decretive will, it acts ought to
Yes,
occur. That
yes.
have I ever said that? Have I ever said that that's not true?
Yes. So, I mean,
When
then
did I
you
say
would
that was not true?
agree.
Wait,
Okay,
when did I
so
say that was not true?
then you would agree that in that context, that thing isn't evil, right? Because
When did I
it's
say that
not the
was not
case
true?
that it isn't morally impermissible.
Okay, when did I say that wasn't true? When have I ever said that?
Well, you keep
When
saying
has that ever
that's
been my
not true,
position?
but you're not addressing what I'm saying.
No, no.
I'm
I said
saying,
when have I? So you, I mean, you keep bringing these. This is about the half dozenth time you brought this up, as though this is some controversial fact of the matter when it's not. I'm asking you when have I
it is a
ever implied that that's
controversial
not true?
fact of the matter because you're saying
Okay,
that
when have I?
that
When have, okay, well, when have
you're
I? So
saying
that's not
that
an answer to my question.
action.
When have
You're
I
saying,
ever said that's not true?
sorry, I wasn't done talking. You're saying that that thing in question is morally permissible, but it's still evil, right? And that denotes a contradiction.
Does this
No,
context thing,
evil
does this
refers to.
context thing that we're talking about amount to anything other than a hypothetical norm? Because if so, then there's just an equivocation going on.
yeah, Darth, can
No,
I
it
ask you
doesn't.
a clarifying question, please?
Sure.
Are you saying that the mere possibility of, like, the allowing the mere possibility of something is cognitively synonymous with that possible thing actually being done?
Well,
Wait, this
if
is just getting in the way. What is this? What's the context?
Is it, yeah,
Well,
does it amount to something more than a hypothetical norm? Because
it's
if it's just
a hypothetical norm, it's conditional
well then,
God's desire.
well, yeah, well, if it's a hypothetical norm, then it's just not a categorical norm. And if it's not a categorical norm, then it's an equivocation on what a moral norm is. So you're just changing the subject.
If Jay agrees that evil is what ought not to happen in respect to God's morally permissive will, then it's relevant.
Evil refers to things that ought not happen with reference to God's prescriptive will. That's my position.
Categorically,
That's always been my position.
categorically ought not happen.
If by categorically you're saying that there's no scenario in which that ought not happen, then no, I'm not saying there's no scenario in which things ought not happen or that ought not happen.
Yeah, categorically means ought not happen, full stop.
All
Irrespective of any
yeah.
conditions, right? It's just a moral wrong. It just should not be done. That's it. That's the concept.
Yeah, my
Now, if,
position is that it's not that there's nothing that for example, when we're talking about rebellion against God, that should not happen with respect to anything. That's not my position.
yeah, so where evil is understood as something that categorically ought not happen, then you just think there is no evil.
No, evil refers to things that are out of accord with God's prescriptive will.
Yeah, but again, you're just redefining. Look, I can redefine evil as anything I want. Like I can redefine evil as walking down the street, right?
I'm
You're
not
just
redefining
changing.
anything. That's how evil is conceptualized as in the Christian worldview. I'm not redefining anything.
Yeah, that's just not a normative conception.
No, it can be normative. It's just normative. It's just not normative in the way that you're trying to posit it.
Yeah, it's some sort of relativistic kind of norm, which is
It's not
weird.
Which
relativistic.
I'm
God is the
just gonna
source of
take
Wait,
it
let
all
Jack
truth.
go.
I
because
don't
the only
understand how
thing
it's
that's
not.
relevant to
What are
the
you talking
discussion
about when you bring up context besides
is
saying
just admitting that there's
relative to
no
this
evil.
context,
As class
JRobin is
X ought
saying
or
that
ought not
there's
happen?
no evil.
Yeah,
as
all things work to the
classically
good.
That's not what I'm saying.
conventionally defined, yeah, there is no evil.
He's just said he's not saying that. So he's just contradicting himself?
No,
No,
he's
because evil
redefining
refers.
evil to
I'm
be,
not
yeah,
defining
he's
evil. I'm
redefining
redefining
evil
it.
in a relativistic way, right? He's relativizing it to whatever context he's talking about. I mean, there's nothing to stop anyone from redefining evil as chess norms or redefining evil as walking down the street norms or anything else, right? But that's ultimately what he's doing. He's just using a proprietary notion of evil that's relativized. So it's
This isn't
basically just a
proprietary.
relativistic
It's what
view.
the Christian worldview holds
No,
to.
that's not what he's doing, Josh.
Yeah. So it's not. Yeah. It's not
Wait,
proprietary. It's
so
what the Christian worldview holds
he
to.
thinks that
Right.
so he
So
thinks that evil is categorical, John?
No, he's saying that categorically. For instance, things that happen are good in a sense that all things work to the good, and so when God judges evil, we don't call it God judging good, we call it God judging evil, and that action of judgment is good, and so the things ought to occur is what JRobin is trying to say.
No, but that's not an answer to my question. Is he, because Josh's claim, which you denied, was that JRobin was not talking about good and evil as categorical, right?
No, what
So
he
you're saying
said, what I objected to, what Josh was saying, is that J. Robin is defining it through proprietary definitions to be relative. That's what he said. That's what I said. J. Robin is not doing. J. Robin is not arguing for relative morality.
he's not arguing for relative morality? So
Oh
you're
That's
my!
saying
correct.
that?
Let's
So you're saying it's
redefine moral
categorical?
relativism as, like, I don't know, chair norms. Or if you're a moral relativist, you do believe that there are going to be stance-dependent moral facts, John.
Of course, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and what do you think when J. Robin said earlier that everything is in accordance with, I mean, God's stances, right? He's admitting that there's nothing that's independent of those stances. There's no stance-independent morals from his perspective.
Does he agree that objective is defined as stance independent?
Do
It
you
doesn't
not
really
know that?
matter what the definition is, right?
No, if
Um,
it is the case that he agrees that objective morals is stance independent and that stance is grounded upon God, then yes, there's a contradiction. But if he does not agree that objective represents stance independent, then it's not necessarily contradictory as far as J. Robbins concerned.
dispute is not a semantic one.
Of course it's about semantics. How else do you derive contradiction
Well,
unless
we're not
it's
interested.
Jay Dodgen left.
I mean, I could
Not
discuss my. I
I
think
mean,
JRobin
shut up,
made a mistake.
up,
I do agree with
up,
Altoid.
No, that's all right.
up,
We're not
up.
interested.
Do you know what he admitted, Jack, earlier? I got him to admit from his point of view that there's nothing that is all things considered evil.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand what he's saying. He could have worded it
It's all right.
better,
Nobody
but
cares.
No one cares, John.
I mean, it's just ridiculous, right?
Game over. Game over. Lights out.
Yeah, that's fine.
You've just been completely obliterated publicly.
Shut up while I'm talking, right?
Caught. You've been folded like a chair caught with your pants down.
Will you fucking shut him up? I want to respond.